a little intro on myself. Just so you guys know, most of you know me anyway. I'm David Rohde. I'm the designated broker for Best Homes Real Estate. I've been a realtor for almost 20 years in a couple of months. Been a broker for 11 or 12 at 4 different companies. Seen a lot of stuff, done a lot of stuff, and fixed a lot of stuff, and still ticking away here. So I like to think I'm an asset to all you guys that work for us, and hopefully I still can be in the future, and feel free to reach out anytime. I'll have contact info at the end of this. And anyone who's not with our company yet, I'd be happy to talk to you as well about joining us and being part of our great culture, environment, and company. So with that all done, let's get into the cure notice. Please share my screen. Bear with me here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
I should tell you what that is. It's the PowerPoint presentation. You guys can see that, right? Cure notice?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes.
All right. Pay attention. This isn't going to be very long because the cure notice is, there's not a whole lot to it unless you guys have a lot of questions. So we're going to go through real quick the cure period contract language. This is section 7A, I believe. Basically, a party shall have an opportunity to cure what's called a potential breach. And this is important. That's why I bolded it there. We'll get into that in a minute. Of the contract. If a party fails to comply with any provision of the contract, the other party shall deliver a notice to the non-complying party specifying the non-compliance. If the non-compliance is not cured within 3 days, and we'll get into the timing of that as well, after delivery of such notice, the failure to comply shall become a breach of the contract. If the escrow company or recorder's office is closed on the last day of the cure period, and the close of escrow must occur to cure the potential breach, close of escrow shall occur on the next day that both are open for business. So let's dig into that a little bit. So a potential breach is what we face when somebody's not done something in the contract that they need to have done. So if a buyer or seller hasn't done something they're obligated to do, it is first a potential breach, not an actual breach. And this is important because this is why the cure period and cure notice come into play. So if someone has not delivered, say, the spuds on time, the seller's property disclosure on time, it's not a breach. It's a potential breach, and we need to cure them and give them 3 days to fix the breach. The cure period gets a little confusing based on the timing. Excuse my throat, guys. I'm still trying to get over this cold. Because if the breach ends on, say, or the cure period ends on, say, like a Sunday, and the breach is for a closing of escrow, obviously you can't close on a Sunday, so it would extend to the next day. So in my example down here, if someone's cured for not closing on a Thursday, the last day of cure period would actually be Monday, not Sunday. So it'd be 4 days instead of the standard 3. So key thing here is that someone's not doing something they're supposed to. It's a potential breach, not an actual breach. And it becomes an actual breach at the end of the cure period. So that's the key about the language in this. Anyone have any questions about that? I know that's be a little confusing. All right, we'll move on. So what can be cured in the contract? Lots of things. A couple things that some people don't know about. We'll go through these real quick. Earnest money that hasn't been delivered yet to the title company. This one's a little tricky because the contract doesn't specify a specific day that earnest money needs to be deposited. It doesn't say, exactly 48 hours or anything else. But, it's customary to have it there within 48 hours, or at least 2 business days. So if it hasn't been delivered in 2 business days, you can still cure. it's better to have that written in the contract that you want it there on a certain date if that's a big deal for you. The seller's property disclosure has to be provided within 3 days, and the insurance claims history within 5 days. So if you don't receive those on time, you can cure. The lead-based paint, if it's not delivered within 5 days, you can cure it for that. One that people don't know much about is the LSU. If it's not provided in 10 days, you can cure on that as well. If any inspection reports are not provided, they're guaranteed to be provided from the buyer's agents. It's part of the contract when they are actually sent to the buyer's agents, not when the bins finally done. So the inspection reports or any termite report, etc., should be given to the listing agent immediately upon when they're available to the buyer's agent. Loan docs not delivered to title can be cured as well. Buyer's funds not be delivered to title can be cured. Seller not making the premises available for inspections or not having the water on or gas on or whatever they need to be done, all of those things can be cured. The seller not signing their, or even the buyer not signing their documents on time can be cured. So lots of things in the contract can be cured. And we actually had a little discussion about this last night. I think it's usually best to contact the other agent, to call them and ask them why something's not on time. Because this is, most importantly, a cooperative business, not an adversarial business. The cure notice, in my mind, even though it's not meant to be mean or anything else, it's simply a tool of the contract, can sometimes come off as harsh, I'll put it that way. Because at the end of the cure period, of course, your client can cancel. So I always find it best to call the agent, work with the other agent, and find out, hey, this is day 5. Am I getting, or day 6? I didn't get the spuds. Or actually, for the spuds, it'd be day 4, or the insurance claims history in day 6. Why haven't I got them? Did you forget to send them? What's the deal? I find it best to try to work with the other agent rather than just send over a cure. But you can send over a cure. It's a tool as a part of the contract. You're welcome to use it. Anyone have any questions about that? All right. So this is an important thing. So there is not an automatic breach of contract. I kind of covered this a minute ago. It's not an automatic breach. It's a potential breach before the end of the cure period. So what this means to you as a buyer and seller is there's no automatic breach of the contract. The non-breaching party must issue a cure period notice to the breaching party detailing the non-compliance of the contract and giving them the full calendar days after delivery of the said notice to cure the breach. So you have to give them the 3 days or 3+, depending on what you're curing and what day it falls on. But you have to give them that notice in order to have an actual breach. So that's important. A lot of agents, I still hear agents say all the time, well, they're in breach of contract. Well, no, if you haven't issued a cure notice, nobody's in breach of contract. And it's not an automatic breach. You have to issue the cure notice first. If you guys have any questions, just go ahead and jump in. I know this is kind of contractual.
I have a question about this.
Sure.
So, okay, we can do it contractually, do the cure notice, but that's just administrative. But what repercussions would come for that minus protecting your client? Like, do you get a notice? Like, if I got cured, do you get a notice that I did something wrong?
So the way the cure notice is designed, it's basically either sent by the buyer or the seller, and it states what the issue is, right? What the potential breach is. So on the cure notice, it'll say seller's property disclosure not received by day 3, and then it gives them 3 days to give it to you. So it's just between the parties in the contract. It doesn't go to title necessarily unless one of the parties wants to cancel at the end of the cure period. Does that answer your question?
No, yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, it's not. It's basically saying one or the other parties is not following the contract, and it's trying to get people back. If the train is off the rails, it's trying to get them back on the rails. so that they're following the contract. So some agents take it as kind of harsh, like, wow, why'd you cure me? It's like, well, because you didn't do what you're supposed to do, or your client didn't do what they're supposed to do. And that's why I say it's usually best to, to call them first, to let them know, hey, I didn't get something I was supposed to get. Did you send it? Did you forget to send it? Work with people. And if they're not providing it, but by the end of that day that you called them, then you can cure. It really does protect your client. And the reality is, at the end of the cure period, you could cancel the contract. So if that's a situation where your client wants to cancel and is fed up with a certain situation or a certain buyer or seller, and it's just, done with the whole thing, and they're tired of being told they're going to get something and they've never gotten it, this is what the cure notice is for, to set people back on the rails or allow them to cancel. So, so here's the actual breach language in the contract, which comes right after that. This section here, it's literally the next paragraph. So this is the potential breach language, and then the actual breach language. In the event of the breach of contract, the non-breaching party may cancel this contract or proceed against the breaching party in any claim or remedy that the non-breaching party may have in law or equity, subject to the alternative dispute resolution obligations that are actually the paragraph right below this. In the case of seller, because it would be difficult to fix actual damages in the event of the buyer's breach, the earnest money shall be or may be deemed as a reasonable estimate of damages, and the seller may, at the seller's option, accept the earnest money as the sole right to damage. So basically, in that case, if the buyer's in breach and they've got a $5,000 earnest money and the seller cures them, the buyer doesn't fix the cure, basically the seller's going to accept the earnest money, and that's the extent of their damages. So in the event of the buyer's breach arising from buyer's failure to deliver the notice in section 2B, which is the loan contingency, or the buyer's inability to obtain loan approval due to the waiver of the appraisal contingency pursuant to, again, the loan section, the seller shall exercise this option and accept the earnest money. So basically, this part of the contract is basically saying the seller, if the buyer's in breach, the seller main remedy, I mean, they could go to the alternative dispute resolution, go to mediation, arbitration, and sue. But this paragraph sets up the seller to accept the earnest money and move on, basically. So, and that's a good thing. We don't want people going to court. I see it very rarely anyway. It's one of the reasons we want to have a decent amount of earnest money when we're listing agents, because we want to have a remedy for our clients. So it's, if a home's in escrow for 45 days and the buyer cancels, well, that's 45 days of keeping the utilities on and paying a mortgage, maybe, HOA fees, etc. So the seller should be compensated for that. And it's best to have a good amount of earnest money so that, they can cover that. Any questions on that at all? All right. This is the second part of the breach language, or I should say the last couple sentences. An unfulfilled contingency is not a breach of contract. The parties expressly agree that failure of any party to comply with the terms and conditions of section 1D to allow a close of escrow to occur on the close of escrow date, if not cured after a cure notice is delivered pursuant to section 7A, which is this section we're talking about, will constitute a material breach of this contract, rendering the contract subject to cancellation. So basically, an unfulfilled contingency is not a breach, but you could use the cure notice to get the client back on the rails, if you will. And then after the cure notice is delivered, it could be deemed a potential breach and an actual breach of the contract, and then the contract can be canceled. So this is all right in the contract section 7A. It's all fun reading, as I'm sure you guys know. The next part I'm going to talk about is the pre-closing walkthrough. There's actually a cure period notice in section 2 of the walkthrough form. The first part of the form says buyer finds the premises property are in substantially the same condition as the date of the contract acceptance. Any concerns or repairs agreed to by seller have been completed with the following exceptions. So basically there's 6 or 7 lines there. Looks like 10 to 12 lines that you can put stuff on there that wasn't done. So this is where you put things that, that were on the Binzer that weren't completed properly. So anything that was, supposed to be done, that wasn't done, that you noticed during the walkthrough, you put them on these lines. And then it has the notice at the end here, the cure period notice. Pursuant to the remedies section of the contract, delivery of this form to seller shall constitute notice of non-compliance with the contract as specified herein. If sailor, sorry about that, misspelling, if seller fails to cure the non-compliance within 3 days after the delivery of this notice, the cure period, the failure to comply shall become a breach of the contract. So the seller is obligated to do what they said they would do on the Binzer. This gets a little tricky because you don't want to cancel a contract or cancel a deal basically because the seller didn't fix a GFI or do something minor. So I tell people to use this very carefully because most buyers don't want to cancel for something silly anyway. So you can often work stuff out. If the seller didn't do something they were supposed to do, maybe they didn't realize they didn't do it, maybe their handyman forgot to do it, maybe their contractor didn't do it right. There's lots of different ways this could be remedied besides canceling the contract. So I would suggest working with the other agent to try to do that. But nonetheless, the walkthrough form does allow a remedy for breach, for cancellation. So I don't know that I've seen this ever used, to be honest with you. I think most agents want the deal to close. Obviously, we all want to get paid. We've all done the work. The buyer wants the house. The seller wants to get rid of the house. They want to move on. So, canceling over something that's kind of minor and just killing a deal for this, using the cure notice is not generally done very often in my experience. So, but it is available, part of the tool package. So, like I said, this was going to be a short seminar. If you guys have any questions, please shoot them at me here. Here's my contact info, of course, if anyone wants to reach me. Any questions?
David, I had a question just to play devil's advocate a little in regards to, let's just say I represent the buyer and I'm doing it just to be like, I'm on my forms and I know how to use all my forms. And sometimes there's sellers who kind of want to get out of it. So let's just say an example like the earnest deposit. So let's just say I use it on the earnest deposit and then something more. I'm sorry, I should have come up with an example for it. I'm just getting to the point where is it possible for me to issue a cure notice and then it gives the opportunity for the seller just to be like, well, I'm not going to do it on purpose so that it does cancel. I mean, you kind of covered it a little bit, but it does kind of open the doors for one of the parties to really walk away if they don't adjust whatever was on the cure notice itself, right? Does that make sense?
Right, and that's a good point. I didn't cover that well. So the thing about the cure notice is you can as a non-breaching party, you can cancel at the end of the cure notice, but you don't have to. Right. So it gives you the opportunity to cancel. So if it's day 3 and you're representing the non-breaching party, they don't have to cancel. They could give them another day. You could use an addendum to give them another day. People have very often said, here, all right, I'm giving you a cure notice and I'm giving you the addendum. So you're either going to give us, extra time to do A, B, or C, or I'm curing you. So choose which document you want to go with. So you can use both simultaneously, and that kind of forces the other person's hand. But yes, unless you're right, people can't use the cure notice and ignore something because they want to get out of the deal. Certainly. I mean, if a buyer's in breach of contract or seller's in breach of contract for not delivering the spuds or the insurance claims history, and the buyer's upset about it, if the seller gets a better offer, they may say, you know what, I'm just going to blow off the buyer and they can cure me and then they could cancel. Yeah, it can happen.
Okay.
No, but that requires the buyer actually cancel though. Remember, they don't have to cancel just because they cured. So it's a tool, but it's not necessarily final until they actually give instructions to title that they're actually canceling. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Hi, David. I just want to clarify some things too. When we issue a cure, does that cure end up and is it breached at 5 o'clock end of business day, or is it end of day? Another question, when we issue the cure and it's a 3 days, the date of issue is at day 1 or day 0? Also, is there a cure regarding issuing or signing the HOA addendum?
First question, it's like everything in the contract, everything else in the contract, this goes the same way as at the end of the day. So 11:59 and 59 seconds, basically. There's no close of business aspect to it at all. That would be nice in a lot of ways, but but no, it's at the end of the actual day. The day you cure, so if you cure today, tomorrow is day 1, just like an inspection period. So all the dates in the contract work the same way that way, which is very helpful, because it'd be a nightmare if we had different documents, using different days. And it is calendar days, not business days. Just to reiterate that. So again, if you're curing for a close of escrow and you cure on a Friday, you have to give them, if they're not open Monday or Tuesday, you've got to give them until they're open. So it could be 3, 4, 5 days if it's a long weekend. It's Martin Luther King weekend, for instance, they're not open on Monday, then you have to give them till Tuesday. So even though it's calendar days, you have to give them, depending on what you're actually curing, you have to give them till the end of business, the next business day. Does that make sense? I hope I didn't articulate that well. And your third question was the HOA?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can cure them for not providing it, not signing it, sure. I mean, it's particularly in the seller's case, because the first part of the HOA addendum is a disclosure, and the buyer has a right to that information. They need to know what all the different fees are. Some of these places, like in Greyhawk, have 3 different HOAs governing them. So, the buyer has a right to that information. So yeah, you could cure for that.
Now with an HOA though, it could be days. I mean, you have to go to them to get the information. So you can't cure the HOA though.
Right, you can't cure on someone who's not party to the contract. So you couldn't cure an agent, right? You couldn't cure an inspector, you couldn't cure a title company, nor can you cure an HOA. You can only cure people that are party to the contract. So,
and the title company is usually where I expect that information to come from, usually.
I have a question. I thought that was on the seller and the seller's agent, the HOA addendum.
yeah, so generally the HOA information that's on the addendum is basically what's the monthly rate, any kind of cap fees, those kinds of things. Basically, the seller knows those, or the seller can call their HOA and get those numbers pretty quickly. That's why we really recommend that you have that filled out prior, to putting it on MLS and update or upload that form into MLS so the buyer can have access to it. But you're right, too, Rob. If there are disclosures and stuff that come from the HOA that come sometime during the escrow. But again, you can't cure the HOA. You could cure the seller for having not provided the HOA information, So basically, the seller, you can kind of force the seller's hand, say, look, it's been 25 days now. We're supposed to close in 3 days, and we still don't have the HOA information. So you can cure the seller and say, hey, can you get on your HOA's case? We need this information before we can close. But you can't cure the HOA directly. Hope that answers your question.
David, quick question for you. And I know maybe we already have it in our brokerage, but can we come up with the list of the most common, cure notices that our agents are generating, and maybe putting some language for each one? So this way, for especially newer agents, less experienced agents, they can go in and again, essentially kind of copy and paste that language into the cure notice.
Yeah, we don't have that, but we certainly can have that. Sure. I mean, generally speaking, if it's something like seller's property disclosure not being delivered, they just need to say seller's property disclosure has not been delivered. But if there's something a little more complicated, then we can certainly create language for that, certainly, yeah. And I can do that, I can add that as part of the broker tips file that we have currently. You know, just do a section on cure notice language,
Yeah, I mean,
it'd be easy to do.
and I'm just talking from the experience in my early days as an agent. Every time I would have that kind of situation where I had to cure the opposing agent, I always kind of had to run this by my broker, and just the language alone, right? Now, what do I put in the cure notice? So having that somewhere handy, I think, will definitely I think it's going to be a bit helpful to the agents.
Yeah, happy to do it. Anybody have any questions? I know it's kind of
David-
quick, but
In
ahead.
regards to the loan docs arriving to title 3 days before close of escrow, depending on the lender, sometimes there's some room for opportunity there for some lenders. And the other agent sends a cure notice to typically the buyer's agent because docs haven't arrived, and then everybody's shuffling and doing their thing. But if I were to get cured in that situation, is my client potentially going to lose their earnest deposit because of scenarios such as this? If God forbid, let's just say the loan gets denied all of a sudden 24 hours a day before, for whatever reason, we were trying, we were shuffling, we were communicating, but then the agent sent their cure notice, and now my poor client, their loan fell apart, so they don't get their house. Are they potentially also open to losing that earnest?
If
yeah,
they can't perform,
Yeah.
that's a different issue.
yeah, they are, Melissa. So if they have to have the documents, 3 days prior, and it's 1 day, and they don't have it, and they were cured basically, then yeah, I mean, they could lose their earnest money. So it's very important for the buyers to work with their lenders to make sure everything's done on time, and for the selling agent to make sure that they're working with the lender to make sure everything's done on time. I mean, thankfully, most agents don't cure very often. They'll actually work with people and say, look, it's going to take an extra day. The lenders needs more time. Most agents are understanding and empathetic that, look, we understand the lenders are doing stuff that's out of our hands, right? We can't just go to the lender and make them do something. Typically, we can't really do anything or make anybody do anything except for what's on our own desk, right? So thankfully, most clients and most agents are empathetic and understand that, look, we get it's going to take an extra day, whatever. When it starts getting into several days and weeks, then that's when people definitely will cure. And again, they don't have to cancel, but they have the right to cancel at the end of the cure period. So some sellers are just get fed up. I actually had one last summer. Got tired of, the guy switched lenders a couple times. He used internet lenders, didn't use anyone with any kind of local presence at all, and they couldn't get the deal done. So we cured them and canceled. The seller was just done with it after. I mean, it was at the end of like another 30 days. So yeah, I mean, that's what it's for. Hopefully people don't use it in the sense that, well, you're 1 day late and we're canceling. I mean, I don't think that's in the best interest of buyers or sellers, but technically they can. That's what the contract allows for. Anyone else? It's not the most exciting part of the contract, I know, but it is an important tool to have in our quivers. I kind of like the LSU one, honestly. I like using it for that purpose, because a lot of times lenders won't provide you an update on the loan, and you need that information. You need to know what they know, and that's the critical part, is that you need to know what they know about their client. Lots of times, back in the day, some of you guys remember, I won't name you, but when the market went to hell years ago, thanks, Rob. When the market went to hell years ago, we had these stated income loans where you could just basically write on a napkin what you earned and process a loan. It was crazy. Thankfully, that's gone, but we want to make sure that the lender is doing their due diligence on the buyer. We don't want any surprises at the end, and that's why the LSU is actually part of the contract, and has to be delivered within 10 days, because we want to know that the lender has vetted this potential buyer and that they're good to go. You want to know that as the buyer's agent because you want to close a deal, but you really want to know that as the listing agent because you don't want to tell your clients at the end of 30 days, well, the guy's got, 40 tax liens or, he's in the middle of a divorce and, got summons or whatever surprises can come up. You want those to come out early. So not getting the LSU after 10 days is something you want to make sure you get.
And that's a material fact, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, certainly. If a buyer can't close due to whatever reason, then absolutely that's a material fact of the seller, sure. Anything else? Well, here's my contact info. You guys know how to reach me. If you have any additional questions that come up later, feel free. Anyone that's not with our company, feel free to call too if you'd like to discuss our company. Or you're welcome to call Melissa and Alan, who are on the call as well, or any of our agents. Hopefully they all love us and say great things about us. So if that's all you guys got, then feel free to reach out to us, but we'll close it for the day.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
David.
much.
Thanks,
Hey,
David.
thanks, you guys. Appreciate you
Thank
showing up. Have a good day.
Thank you.